I'm wondering if I'm in the wrong for not wanting to talk about our child's last name with my former partner. My ex and I separated 5 years back. We keep things friendly enough for our kids' benefit. Even so, there's a lot of lingering animosity between us that's difficult to overcome, and this kind of conversation just makes it worse. My ex got remarried a year back and is now 7 months pregnant with another baby. Not too long ago, she emailed me, explaining that she and her new husband had talked about adding his last name to our kid's existing last name. She claimed that the children were already aware of their ideas and weren't annoyed. However, my kids brought it up to me 2 days before my ex even contacted me. My kids mentioned the topic and said they didn't want their names altered, and my daughter was upset because she thought it was a done deal, even if they didn't like it. My son felt the same way. I responded to my ex, saying I wasn't giving my permission and I wasn't going to discuss it further. My response was brief and to the point, and I intended for that to be the end of it. Then I got a torrent of emails from her calling me a jerk. They said we should talk about matters concerning our kids and that I was refusing the kids what they wanted, and she would take me to court over this no matter what. I told her that was perfectly fine. If she wanted to blow money on a legal battle, I'd see her there. Her husband then decided to call my workplace and verbally attack me about it. Some friends suggested I should have at least had a conversation with her instead of just rejecting the idea and refusing to discuss it. I'm inclined to say this is a no-go. Let's examine the top comments. Definitely not a whole. If her husband called you at your workplace in response, I highly doubt any conversation could have gone well unless they got what they wanted. They had a right to ask, but the name calling and the work call were out of line, potentially causing issues for you. Not a whole. I thought it was thoughtful of Opie to leave his kids out of it by saying they also didn't want this. It seems like Opie could easily suggest her husband change his name and give the new kid the same last name as Opie. Then everyone could share a last name? Isn't that wonderful? Not a whole. To begin with, these are also your children. Your opinion should hold weight while they're still children. Additionally, it sounds as though the children weren't actually asked, but simply informed this was happening. So she was dishonest with you. I should add, if your ex or her partner are contacting you at work, it absolutely better be a child-related crisis. There's no other acceptable reason. The children might have misunderstood things. My ex never did the best job communicating. But anyway, they've made it perfectly clear to me that they don't want this to happen. Therefore, that's everything that needs to be said. Yes, that's my third point. They are against it. Solid, not a whole. And while it's a bit negative, I advise you to write down her attempt to force this name change and the reaction your children had. Let me get this straight. Do I understand correctly that they want to add the new husband's last name to your children? That's so absurd. I really hope I misunderstood that completely. This is exactly what they're aiming for, I realize. So it would be Jones-Smith or maybe Smith-Jones instead of just Jones. Moving on to the next thing. Do I seem like a jerk for not wanting to combine my last name with someone else's with a hyphen? My mom recently tied the knot, and she and her new husband are planning on hyphenating their last names to create a single, unified family name. His kids and my half-siblings are all in agreement with changing their last names to the hyphenated format. But I'm not on board for myself. I've made my feelings clear about this, probably at least 20 times since the conversation first started. I simply don't want my name to change. That won't hold up in any court, not with my consent. My mom is really bothered by this, and she's attempted to persuade me, even offered me inducements to just agree to it. Her husband inquired why I was refusing, and I explained to him point-blank that I like my name the way it is, and it's a connection to my father, who passed away 2 years ago, and I don't want anyone taking anything away or adding anything to it. My name is my name. I've had it for 15 years, and no, simply because I'm a woman doesn't mean I will change it if I get married, so that's not a good argument to try with me. I also mentioned that I could potentially do the same thing when I'm older and get married and hyphenate, and I don't want to end up with 3 last names, and in that scenario, it would likely be his name that would change, not my dad's. Both of them are quite frustrated that I won't cooperate with them on this matter and agree to the name change. My mom has told me I'm being obstinate just to be obstinate, and that a family name that bonds us together is a good thing, and that I'm distancing myself from that. My husband said I was making him feel like he was deficient in some way because of his name. I responded that was his issue, and I had already made my position plain. Am I in the wrong here? Absolutely not. Your name is yours, and at 15 you're old enough to make your own decisions. What are they trying to do? Compel you to alter it, only to let you change it back when you are grown. Heck, when my brother adopted his wife's children, the youngest was probably 4 or 5, and the oldest was 9 or 10. Perhaps they were even younger. Honestly, I think they were. Anyways, they asked the older one if he wanted to take my brother's surname. They came to an agreement, and he took the last name as a middle name. The little one was not old enough to understand the implications. Anyway, names hold so much significance, and Opie totally has the right to select hers. Not in the wrong, Opie. They have their motives for asking, just as you have yours for declining. Nevertheless, I've already stated this at least 20 times since it was first brought up. I don't want my name altered, and I will not go to court and agree. That's a good 18 or 19 times more than what was actually needed. To push this matter on their daughter makes them clearly the villains in this situation. Definitely not the good guys. You aren't marrying the guy. She is. She can change her name, and any children they have can have his new name. Unless he legally adopts you, you shouldn't feel any pressure to do it. And even if he does, you're 15. You should be able to have your own say. It's just a label, you know? Just because my mom gives me an additional last name doesn't mean our connection changes. There is no situation where he's becoming my adoptive parent either. I'm okay with battling the idea of a name change or even being adopted if I ever have to. Moving on. Am I a jerk for making my stepdad feel bad in front of his buddies after I called my biological father a loser? My mom was a single parent until I was 8 years old, and that's when she began dadding Luke, my stepdad. My biological father wasn't involved because my mom said he had a drinking problem, and she knew he wouldn't be a good father. He didn't even know about me until I was 10, and it was a whole ordeal. But he'd been sober for a long while at that point. Now I'm 16, and we're really close. He's not just a fun dad, he also has rules, and he was always candid about his struggles because he doesn't want me going down the same path. Luke didn't like it when my father re-entered my life, and it showed because he'd get really tense. And then he acts like my dad doesn't exist when he comes to see me at events or for my birthday celebrations. I don't get to hang out with my dad often. Only weekends when I'm on vacation from school or on holidays, so I ask him if we could just spend more time together. My mom is not in favor of it, as she thinks I should be at home, so they are now going to court for him to get joint custody. Recently, Luke's friends came over, and they were playing cards in the kitchen. I went downstairs to charge my phone, and I overheard his friends asking how the custody battle was going. He started going on about my father being worthless, and then he said he couldn't fathom why he ever agreed to go with that drunk. My dad used to struggle with alcohol, but he'd been completely sober for around 11 years at that point. He had started his own company and was earning a good living, so his words just infuriated me. So from the living room, I shouted out that my dad actually makes more money than him, so I didn't understand how he could call my father a loser when he'd made his life better since quitting drinking. I stormed out of my room, fuming, though I realized it was likely silent in the kitchen. Afterwards, my mom came to me, and she said I shouldn't have humiliated him like that. She's aware Luke was out of line, trash-talking my dad, but she needs me to understand it's difficult for him, knowing I prefer to spend more time at my dad's place than there. So I'm not sure if I was the bad guy here. Now let's look at the best comments. You're not the jerk. Your mom and stepdad, though. Yeah, they are. What they're doing is called parental alienation, basically trying to manipulate you into turning against your other parent, instead of allowing you to have the relationship you want. You're old enough now that you can share your feelings with the court. If you want more time with your dad, let him know you're prepared to state under oath that you want more time with him. Yeah, I get it. That's why I informed my dad that I'll tell a judge, or whoever it may be. He previously didn't want to push for additional time unless I expressed that desire too. It sounds like you would actually be better off, away from Luke anyway. It's not a good situation. My father was an alcoholic, but he recovered. Luke, on the other hand, isn't a bad person and he's remaining unchanged. It's really not a good situation. He shouldn't have spoken about the issue in the house, even with friends present. Honestly, they don't seem to care at all about your emotions in all of this. I shouldn't have to feel any negative emotions about wanting my dad to still be in my life. I think it's really strange that they've made it all about themselves. It's immature, self-centered, and a lack of responsibility. If this was such a problem for them, maybe they should focus on becoming people who you actually want to be near. You hear about reasons adults cut off contact with family, and honestly, this scenario fits perfectly. The following tale is called, Am I in the Wrong for Not Letting My Stepsister Borrow My Ring? My stepsister's mom died when she was very young, so she barely recalls her. She never had anything to remind her of her because she didn't get anything of sentimental value from her mother. My mom passed away when I was little too, but I remember she had a ring from my grandmother that she planned to give me, but she passed away before she could. I wear that ring constantly, and I'm usually very cautious about who touches it, except for my dad and grandmother. My stepsister noticed the ring and she's been looking at it. She's frequently asked to wear it and I always decline. My stepsister would always keep pleading. It doesn't make any sense to her, so I'm baffled as to why a grown woman would be practically pleading for another adult's ring. I refused when she requested it last week, just like always. She lost her temper with me, claiming it was unfair that I always get what I want, and she called me a small-minded and self-centered jerk. She ran to her dad like a little kid, but now her father is angry with me. My dad stood up for me, and now they are in an argument. My stepsister is blaming me, and I kind of feel awful. Am I the bad guy for not letting my stepsister borrow my ring? Definitely not the a-hole. Make certain you protect that ring because if she's this fixated on it, she may resort to taking it. I arrive to offer the same perspective. Not the a-hole, it's not hers to begin with. It has no relevance to her, but it's deeply, deeply meaningful to you. Maybe that's why she wants it, which is even more troubling. If her dad is encouraging her, then he's a jerk and a tyrant. She wouldn't happen to be a modern-day Veruca Salt, would she? Not the bad guy, and I'm astonished you thought you needed to seek advice. Family relationships can really warp your perception of things. When things are completely out of whack, the things that are obvious to others are difficult for those in the thick of it to see. There have been many moments in my life where people wondered, WTF, why did you believe you were a bad person? And it's like, well, my family always made me feel that way, so I'd start to doubt myself. Not the a-hole, that ring is yours, not hers. Plus, it belonged to your mother, which gives it a significant value to you. If she truly desires a ring, she's totally capable of purchasing one herself. She's not automatically deserving of your ring, you know. Now, let's get to the final story. Am I in the wrong for refusing to let someone else walk my daughter down the aisle at her wedding? I was pretty green, just 18, when I had this brief affair with a much older woman. It was just a few months, then we didn't have any contact again. I discovered 3 years ago that I have a 20-year-old daughter who I fathered with this woman. It all came to light because she matched with my brother on some DNA websites he had an account on. That's how this whole tale came to be known. She never told me about the pregnancy because she didn't want her husband to be aware. Evidently, he did find out when my daughter was 7 years old and left for some time, but they reunited when she was a teenager. However, their relationship was quite tense. It became even more so once my daughter learned the truth, since neither of them ever came clean to her. I've been spending time with my daughter on a regular basis ever since. We've been trying to develop our own father-daughter bond. This experience has been emotionally difficult, but ultimately fulfilling. From what I understand, my daughter keeps only a little contact with them both and doesn't visit either as often as she used to. She became engaged to her boyfriend 5 years ago. My daughter's planning a small backyard wedding, and she's given me the privilege of walking her down the aisle. Honestly, it was a really emotional moment, and I immediately agreed. This information has reached her mother and her husband, and neither of them is thrilled about it. However, since my daughter isn't in close contact with them, they've reached out to me. Because he's the one who essentially raised her, it feels quite disrespectful for me to assume this role, especially since my involvement has been relatively recent, after he put in all the groundwork. I had a lot I wanted to say at that moment, but I managed to hold back as much as I could. It stings to think that I probably should have let him give her away, and I get that they share a long history. And he's asked me man to man to do him this favor and back out of this, since he's been the most influential man in her life, and he understands it wasn't my fault that I wasn't around. But even so, looking at it from his point of view, it must be tough, I'm sure. My daughter doesn't want to change her mind about it, so I figured stepping aside on my own would be the next best option, as declining to do so would be pretty thoughtless and self-centered of me. It's almost comical to hear that from her, I admit. I need to have a clean slate on this to be sure. It isn't up to you, and it is not that other man's choice. It's her decision, and she specifically asked me, not her stepdad. It just seems to me that they, the mother and stepfather, are very eager to control what everyone else decides. To even have the gall to whine that Opie didn't put in the effort when he was completely unaware of his own child's existence. They're total jerks, and by demanding Opie back off, they're attempting to strip his daughter of her agency all over again, just in a sneaky way. They're practically asking to be cut off completely. Wouldn't that be a hilarious twist of fate? Not Hal. If your daughter barely speaks to her mother and her stepdad, there's likely a very good reason for their strained relationship. If you were to remove yourself from the situation, there's no certainty that she'll suddenly forget their issues and ask him to be part of the wedding ceremony. You'll also be robbed of another irreplaceable memory with your daughter. You've already missed out on so much already, and it wasn't your doing. Don't miss this opportunity. If you do this time, it will be on your conscience, and you'll live to regret it for the rest of your life. Don't give up on your right to walk her down the aisle. It's ultimately your daughter's decision. Though you ought to chat with your daughter about how you might include the only dad she has known for many years. Sure, they screwed up big time by not telling her or you, but everybody makes mistakes, and he was the one who raised her after all. Not Hal. Barely. He was absent for a good chunk of time. If she felt he was deserving, she'd have picked him. Plus, he rarely has contact with them anyway.